Alright guys, we're back in my garage for another video, and today we're going to be taking a deeper look at the B58 valve cover. Unfortunately, when I bought this one, it was damaged in shipping, so you can kind of see this hole right here. That's where this post is supposed to go. This is one of like the standoffs where your engine cover presses down onto it and clips into it. Even though I don't run an engine cover on my car, this just leaves a big gaping hole in the valve cover, so this one isn't usable. So I reached out to the company, they sent me a new one, no problem there. But now I have this brand new valve cover that I can do whatever I want with it. So I decided I was going to make this video to do an overview of everything that we're looking at, just to help you guys maybe be a little more familiar with what's on top of your engine. And then hopefully I'm going to try to carefully open this up, cut into it, and see what the internals look like. I know that's a mystery for a lot of you guys. And I know, kind of the idea of it, but I've never seen it myself, and I'm kind of curious as well. So hopefully you guys find this informational. Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like this, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. So, like I said, this is from a B58 Gen 1. This was going in my 340i. The Gen 2 B58 valve cover for like the Supra and M340i and those other cars is a little bit different. I'll point out some of the differences, but overall, like the general design is very similar. So this should help you guys out as well if you're just trying to understand what is going on top of your engine. Basically, the valve cover is what seals the top of your engine because, you have your cylinder head on top. All of the valves and valve train cams and everything are in there being lubricated, and all that needs to be contained. But another big portion of this is it manages your PCV system. So inside of the crankcase, like underneath the pistons, a lot of pressure is building up, and the car has a lot of basically long lines going through the engine to vet those gases up to the cylinder head, and then they are managed by the valve cover to basically route it back to your intake. So the OEM design uses the vacuum from the intake to pull those gases out. It goes back into the engine and gets burnt off and exits through the exhaust. It's a pretty efficient system overall. In idea is very good to have a vacuum pulling on your crankcase. That just helps everything seal up better. It just minimizes how much pressure is basically building up underneath the car, because that can cause things to fail, like your rear main seal, or it can damage internals in your engine if you have too much pressure underneath the engine while you're creating excess pressure on top of the piston with, boost pressure and things like that. So that's the whole goal here, is basically to manage that in an emissions friendly way. A lot of us convert it to vent to atmosphere systems, but basically no amount of venting is too much. You just want to get that crankcase pressure as low as possible. So before we dig too much into that, let's just take an overview of what we see right here. So this is basically the valve cover looking from where your exhaust would be. So this is where your turbo would be. This is where your intake manifold would be. In the middle, we've got 6 holes for our spark plugs. And then we've also got these 6 cutouts for our injectors. Pretty simple. I mean, obviously you guys see a lot of that when you're working on your car, but something that probably doesn't stand out is some of the other features, I guess, that are inside of here. So this is where your high pressure fuel pump mounts. It actually has a piston that rides on your exhaust cam. So your exhaust cam is going through here, and your high pressure fuel pump is mounted on here, riding on that cam to create fuel pressure. You'll notice that the actual gasket is supported by the valve cover, so it doesn't sit directly on the cylinder head. It just kind of has these 2 holes where the high pressure fuel pump screws into the cylinder head, but the gasket itself is supported by the valve cover. We also have a PCV outlet on this side. This is considered the high outlet. The reason why you have to have this is because when you're creating boost pressure, if you have anything routed to the intake manifold, then it can create positive pressure from the turbo and push backwards into the crankcase. And again, your whole goal here is to minimize how much pressure is in the crankcase. So this routes to the intake before the turbo, and that's something that never sees pressure. So if you're running boost, if you're basically full throttle, accelerating, whatever, and you're creating boost pressure, the valve cover should be routing your PCV gases through this outlet. Now the downside here is if there is oil or any contamination in your PCV, it's going through your turbo, through your intercooler, and the whole intake tract. So the whole goal is to actually route it on this side. You basically want it as close to your intake valves as possible in order to minimize how much of those gases are actually going through your entire intake tract. So the way that it works on our cars is that there are these 3 holes, and these holes go to what people call head ports. So if you're not familiar, basically these head ports are actually on the cylinder head, and the PCV gases come through this hole straight, basically right in front of your intake valves, and get sucked into the engine. So if there's ever a point where you're idling, cruising, not really creating any boost pressure, so there's minimal chance that pressure could be pushing back into the crankcase, it'll come through these 3 holes. Now, for anybody that's curious, on the other end where your actual head ports are, this is what they look like. So you can see it's kind of split. So this one is for cylinder 1 and 2. This one is for cylinder 3 and 4. And then this one is for cylinder 5 and 6. So those are kind of the mating holes on your cylinder head where the air flows through, and then the PCV gases get sucked back into your cylinder head to get burnt off. And if you're plugging your head ports, what people typically do is they go in these holes and they'll thread it, and then they'll put a plug in there, and that just plugs it and completely stops it so that no more airflow can get through that way. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how the PCV gases are routed on the low side. It'll come through these holes and get split to 2 cylinders each, and then that gets sucked back into the engine and burnt off. Now let's look at some of the other components here. So this is where your oil cap goes. So this is where you fill up oil. This is where you have your PCV diaphragm. We'll actually pop this off to show you guys what's inside here. All right, so inside of here, we've got the actual diaphragm. So this cap is just a plastic cap that snaps onto the valve cover. And then this diaphragm is kind of what does a lot of the work. And then you also see a spring right here. So this basically creates pressure and pushes the diaphragm where it needs to be. So that's what this kind of sub-assembly looks like. And then there's just a big hole. So this is, again, a part of the PCV system, routing gases that are inside of the valve cover. And as they're coming out, it helps manage where those gases go. Now, one other thing I want to point out, so some people have mentioned like having cam position issues. So we actually have 2 cam position sensors on here. This is the intake cam position sensor. It measures off of a wheel kind of in the middle of the intake cam. And then over here by the high side outlet is your exhaust cam position sensor. And this measures it pretty much all the way at the end. I think both sensors are the same. If I remember correctly, they're both the same part number. They just have 2 on the car, one to measure the intake and one to measure the exhaust. And then on this side, this is sandwiched between the engine and your firewall. This is where your Vanos actuators will snap into place. So they're basically these little kind of circles, and you turn them about 45 degrees and they snap into these clips. And then to remove them, you basically just turn them counterclockwise and they just pull straight out. There is a little gasket in here. Sometimes it comes out with the actuator. Other times it stays in here. So sometimes if you have a leak at the back of the valve cover, you might need to replace those gaskets or make sure it's all the way snapped in. But generally, these are pretty good. If they do fail, again, these are the same part number. So just like the cam position sensor, you can just switch the intake and exhaust side. And if you're having an intake issue or an exhaust issue that's giving you a code and you switch those and it moves from intake to exhaust or vice versa, then you know that component went bad. So that's a really easy way to kind of diagnose it. And like I said, same thing with the cam position sensors. If you think that sensor's bad, you can just flip it and see if the code switches with it. Now, the valve cover gaskets also are pretty common to fail on BMWs. I haven't actually experienced one yet, and it doesn't seem super common on B58, but you can see what the gasket looks like. So there's one that goes through the entire middle of the engine, and this just seals up all of your injectors and your spark plugs. And then there's also one that goes around the outside. Let's see if I can find a good point to grab it. There we go. And this goes around the entire perimeter of the engine. So super cheap part typically. It is still rubber, and it seems like over time they just kind of get brittle and hard and don't seal as well. So if this fails, what you'll typically see is oil pooling up on the turbo, like on that heat shield, or kind of burning off on the turbo manifold if it gets that far. And that just tells you that you probably need to replace that gasket. All right, so now let's take a deeper look at the PCV system itself. So we've got this flipped over, and we're going to go ahead and start digging into this. One thing I've already noticed, so this is like kind of the cover for the low side, and you can kind of see it looks like it's just kind of sonic welded all the way around the perimeter. So I'm going to try to crack that open. I can actually see, maybe you guys can tell, there's like a little opening right here. So I'm pretty sure this is where the gases come in. And then if you look right into this hole, you can kind of see there's a flap. So we'll see what that looks like once I crack it open. And then over here on the high side, same thing, there's like this plastic cover. It looks like it's just sonic welded all the way around. So we'll try to crack that open. And then right here is where the hole is. And I'm assuming that's where the gases come in on the high side. And then in this hole, there's again another little flap inside of there. I don't know if you can quite see it, but yeah, so we're going to start opening this up. I'm just going to use a pry tool to carefully, if at all possible, pop this open, try to keep everything intact inside so you can kind of see what's going on in a little more detail. Wish me luck. All right, so I tried doing this carefully, and obviously it's not working. I guess these plastic welds are much stronger than the ones I used to make when I was in automotive manufacturing. Not really a bad thing for BMW, but if I want to tear into it, it's going to take a little more work. So we're going to be stepping up to a Dremel. Still out of, what I have in my arsenal. It's probably not the best tool, but it should give me a little bit of control and allow me to cut into this, a little bit slowly. So let's see how this works. Time to try again. All right, so we're starting to see some of what we have going on here. Like I said, there was like a hole on this side where the air was coming in, and then it kind of wraps around and goes into this hole. I'm guessing it goes down this path. So I kind of started getting some room to crack this open. I want to see if we can, preserve as much of the geometry as possible without just cutting into the valve cover. So let's see what else we can get. So I'm going to have to look up what this actually is. I'm guessing it's some sort of separator. Not 100% sure. Unfortunately, I might have cut into it a little bit, or maybe that's just where it was also welded, but it's basically just a plastic piece. I don't see any moving components to it or anything. I'm pretty sure it's an oil separator, but don't quote me on that. I'll have to look that up. All right, so let's show what we see on the high side. It actually doesn't look too complicated, but basically, like I said, we had that hole right here underneath the cover where gases could come in. They route around here. They go through this feature, which again, I believe is an oil separator, but you can kind of see it's just a bunch of little ports here that the gases flow through. Hopefully that's showing on the camera clearly. But yeah, the gases come through there. And then this is the little flap underneath the high side port. So I guess once pressure builds up enough, it pushes past that cap and then comes out the port. So actually not as complicated as I thought it would be. There is another small hole over here, and it comes out of this hole. I'll have to actually look this one up because this is on like the exhaust side of the valve cover. I'm not sure what port would be pulling from here, but maybe that's just another vent for gases to come up and then out that side. That's my assumption. This might be where gases come up from the crankcase directly through the cylinder head, and then it goes through here and out that port. All right, so that was fun. Now we've got to do the low side, so let's see if I can get this all taken apart. So this is already looking nice and complex. The gas comes in on this side, then it looks like it routes down, routes up, and then there's another wall in here, so I'm guessing it circles around again. All right, so we finally got the low side cut open. That took a lot longer than I thought it would, but you know, it is what it is. So there are pieces of plastic all over my garage. I think one piece even landed in the 440i engine bay, but it's worth it because now we can see what's actually going on in here. So really quick, like I said, this is the intake side. The air kind of comes through this side, goes through a little bit of ducting, goes through another one of these features, and then it kind of goes through a weird path. So this actually routes through here, and this hole is the same big opening that we get on top. So for those of us that have like an aftermarket PCV delete, basically all of those gases vent straight out. That's how we're converting it to delete any PCV features with the diaphragm. We're converting it just to VTA, so any gases that are in the valve cover come through that hole and vent directly out of that hose. Now, if it's not doing that, then when the diaphragm comes up and that spring is pushing it up, it basically goes through this little hole. And in this hole is basically where this little metal cap is. We're about to take this off, but just to illustrate what's going on real quick, so it comes through this hole and then it routes through basically this long feature right here. And you can kind of see there's a hole right there, hopefully. There's a little hole there. There should be one in front of each of the head ports, but when it goes through, where are we? Through this hole, then it vents into this hole and then flows out through the head port into the cylinder head. So that's also why Basically, again, for people that are plugging this port, when you put those O-rings in there, it effectively blocks off the head ports. So when people say that they want to block off the head ports and they actually screw into those holes on the head, that's of course one way you can do it, but also pushing the PCV delete cap in here with the O-ring seals up this hole and essentially blocks off the head ports as well. So kind of cool. Let's go ahead and take this off since I can. So this plastic piece comes off. And can I take off this metal? Yeah, so this comes off as well. There's a little rubber gasket. So basically, I guess this is like sealing it closed. It's just a little rubber gasket on the valve cover and then this metal cap on top. And then after you remove that, you can see straight through the hole. Okay, update. After some further research, it seems like these are actually check valves. So these have features. Let's see. So this is what it looks like. And that metal piece can actually prevent airflow. So if this breaks, which I broke this one myself taking it apart, but if part of this breaks, like where this kind of spring, I guess is supposed to be holding it in place, then that can damage your valve cover and also cause it to smoke. So unfortunately, it looks like we have a couple different levels of PCV control, even internally in the valve cover, that make things a little bit more complicated. But this is what it looks like. So air flows through here, and presumably, depending on how much actual crankcase pressure you have, this either vents or blocks off this port so that it's only actually releasing gas to the head ports at the right time. So yeah, it looks like even on the high side, we have that same kind of cage holding in the middle flat. So let's see if we can pop this out. So yeah, pretty much the same thing. No O-ring on this side, but you just have that metal flat, kind of helping seal things up. And then the cage holding it in place, I guess, so it doesn't completely blow out, of course, but that'll hold it in place. So yeah, a little bit deeper dive than what I planned on doing initially, but that should give you a little more insight. That kind of shows you what's going on inside of our valve cover. Big thing basically is just to delete all of, those metal caps and everything that could be acting as a check valve inside of the valve cover and just allowing it to vent to atmosphere. So options like, the VTT valve cover basically is just a flat, open piece of metal with holes in it that can actually vent out the gases. You want to avoid all of the unnecessary features that can fail, break, not open when they're supposed to, etc., because that's what basically damages things and causes you to have poor crankcase ventilation. So yeah, I think that's mostly it for this video. Let me know if you guys have any other questions. I'll have this kind of sitting around for a little while before I scrap it, so maybe I can make a part 2 if there's anything that you guys feel like I missed. But other than that, that's it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.